Hi everyone, and welcome to Valkyrie Sound. Chases in films and games can give audiences a real sense of speed, and this effect isn't just based on what we see, but on what we hear as well. In this video, we're going to look at how sound has been used to create a sense of speed. Before we do that, we're going to go back a little bit to have a look at how sound is developed and how advances in cinematic sound technology have led to the sounds that we experience today playing games at home and elsewhere. The Star Wars films pioneered sound design in cinema. That can't be understated. From the sound design of Ben Burtt, about which an entire film could be made, to the revolution of clear, dynamic theatrical sound employed by Lucasfilm's THX, the sound system that was developed by Tomlinson Holman for the third Star Wars film, Return of the Jedi, in 1983. In his book Audio Vision, composer, filmmaker and sound analyst Michel Chion looks at what Walter Murch describes as that mysterious perceptual alchemy, in that whatever virtues sound brings to the film are largely perceived and appreciated by the audience in visual terms. To put it simply, the better the sound, the better the image. The cinematic sound of Return of the Jedi is high definition. It's rich and varied, using a wide frequency range from extreme highs to lows, and a wide dynamic range, offering weak and strong amplitudes or volumes of sound. In this famous chase scene, the speeder bikes whoop in a medium to high range. There are high-pitched whines that rise and fall. We get high-pitched whipping sounds of trees and vegetation zipping past, and as Leia and Luke duck under a falling tree, we get a loud whoosh.
Quick, jam their conflict, center switch!
In the next cut, the three Scout Trooper speeder bike engines sequentially rise in pitch as they appear on screen and head off through the forest. Although there are lower frequency sounds in the mix, we perceive most of the high frequency sounds in this scene, and it's the high frequencies that give us this sense of relative speed. There's also a distinct lack of musical accompaniment in this chase, which lets the sound effects breathe and occupy a greater width of the audio spectrum without battling against an orchestra. Compare this to the use of music in the asteroid chase scene from The Empire Strikes Back. Here we take a more distanced view of the chase. We can't see our hero's pursuers in the flesh, and the music occupies higher frequencies, while the dialogue and engines tend towards intermediate and low frequencies.
Never tell me the odds.
The Empire Strikes Back was released in 1980. That's 3 years before the development or the release of the THX sound system, which coincided with Return of the Jedi. So it's tempting to see that as some rationale for the different treatment of sound and score in the speeder bike scene and the asteroid chase scene. Michel Chion argues that sounds were better defined after 1983, writing that audio definition was improved through gains in high frequencies that reveal a new multitude of details and a greater sense of presence and realism. This, he argues, allows sound to contain more information, or it gives sound designers and directors more scope to select what they want or don't want to include in the audio mix. And interestingly for the subject of this video, Chion notes that this access to higher frequencies lends itself to a more lively mode of listening, particularly to agile phenomena, e.g. a feeling of temporal acceleration or speed. So with that potted history out of the way, what about games? Not every part of film sound analysis is applicable to gaming for the obvious differences between the two forms of media. Fundamentally, one is interactive and one is passive. But racing games are an obvious candidate for examples of how sound can be used to generate an impression of speed. Motion blur, speed lines framing the screen, cameras that lag a little as a player speeds along a track or throws their vehicle into a fast corner, all of these visual elements are buffed by the presence of sound. The Wipeout series for Sony's PlayStation is a brilliant example of how increasing sensitivity amongst developers towards the usefulness of sound to create a sense of speed has evolved over time. There are 10 games in the series, starting with Wipeout in 1995, although the 10th installment is really a remaster of 4 of the earlier titles. Outside of its soundtrack, courtesy of The Prodigy, Cold Storage, Left Field and others, the first game was pretty sparse on anything other than weapon sounds, with a simple engine sound and limited collision sound effects. On the plus side, there are some pretty nice reverb effects, even though spatially they don't always make much sense. In Wipeout 2097, we get an announcer, scrape and collision sound effects, and an engine sound that's more present in the mix. It's louder, and it operates more in the high frequency range, so it cuts through all of the other sounds that generally occupy the other frequencies in the game. It sounds like a small jet engine, and that in itself gives it a sense of speed, particularly at the faster race classes like Phantom. Again though, it's a pretty static sound, with pitch and intensity really only changing depending on your ship's speed. Wipeout 2097 was a step up for the series though in terms of audio. There's more variety, and the audio does more legwork to create a sense of time pressure, with warnings of incoming attacks and the rising pitch of the countdown effect as you race to hit the next checkpoint. Wipeout 3, which is my personal favourite of the series, didn't really give us anything different on the audio front, with the engine sounds pretty low in the mix and music taking priority again in terms of the volume, as in the first game. Here the engine sound is more subdued, but it's a blend of high and low frequencies. When the music isn't as loud, you can hear that there are several layers to the engine sound. Wipeout Fusion was the game in the Wipeout series that gave us more variety to our engine sounds, with high frequency sounds used to draw clearer distinctions between low and high speeds. Wipeout Fusion isn't a game that I owned. The style for me didn't really fit with the style in 2097 or Wipeout 3. By comparison, Fusion felt more arcadey and felt like it was aimed at more of a younger audience. Let's skip ahead to the Wipeout Omega collection. Released in 2017, 10 years on from the previous installment, this remaster of 4 of the series' earlier titles had a complete audio redesign from the ground up. During that gap, in that 10-year period of absence, sound design had developed in numerous ways, particularly in film. So here we have the pod race scene from Star Wars Episode 1. And here we have a scene from Tron Legacy. And here we have the attack drones from Oblivion.
Jack Harper, Tech 49. Hey!
Now all 3 of those films are cited influences on the engine design for Wipeout Omega. Audiences playing the next Wipeout game are going to expect sounds that were more in line with what the cinema had already exposed us to, more in line with the possibilities that movie sound designers had achieved on the big screen. And it's in Wipeout Omega that the developer sound design team, supervised by Luc Couthier, took those influences and ran with them, elevating the visuals with a highly dynamic range of sound. This attention to the detailing of the sound extended to dynamics and sound frequencies, with key attention paid to the frequency domain of each sound so that high priority sounds, like the announcer or certain weapons, lowers or removes other audio elements that conflict with them. In this clip from Claudia's website, the volume of the player's engines is reduced to prioritise the sound of the energy leech weapon. If you're interested in knowing more about the sound design of Wipeout Omega, I suggest you check out Claudia's website. There's a lot of information on there. And if you're interested in creating engine sounds yourself, look, Claudia did a little video for Native Instruments using their massive synth, which walks you through how he created different aspects of the sound to respond to thrust and other game data to influence how the sound would sound in the game.
Yeah, it's good. Let me see.
There's more grit and character to the engine sounds in Wipeout Omega, and it's clearly been heavily informed by the sounds coming out of Hollywood. The audio detail in this latest installment of the Andy Krav racing series is a far cry from the early days of the first Wipeout, way back in 1995, and yet spiritually it remains the same. Whereas the first game appears to prioritise visuals as a mechanism for convincing us that we're moving at high speed, in the latest game it's that combination of audio and visual that affects our perception. The broader width of dynamic range and the definition of sound frequencies across a wide spectrum on modern home TVs and on dedicated sound systems, if you're lucky enough to have one, point exactly to Michel Chion's claims in audio-vision. More detail, a multitude of detail, and a greater sense of presence in the entertainment we're engaged with, a feeling of temporal acceleration, particularly with agile phenomena.
Plasma.
There's nothing more agile than a Wipeout racer, and for me, the Wipeout series as a whole is the perfect embodiment of Chion's analysis of film sound design, realised in game sound design. And it's sobering to realise that without Star Wars, without George Lucas and Tomlinson Holloman, without Lucasfilm and THX, our games would sound very different. Once cinema's sound technology had percolated down to home systems, and as Sony harnessed the power of CD technology, our sound experiences were guaranteed to never be the same again.
Rockets.
As you'll have no doubt realised, this week's video wasn't a tutorial, more of an overview or sound analysis of a particular type of sound, a method of using sound that I found particularly interesting and wanted to talk about. Chion's book, Audio Vision, definitely worth checking out if you can get a copy of that. It does really apply to film sound, but many of the ideas that Chion discusses in that book still relevant to film today, and as we've looked at, some of it is applicable to game sound design as well. I hope that's been useful for you, and I hope it's especially been useful for you if you're developing your own engine sounds at the moment. Good luck with your projects, take care, and as always, thanks very much for watching.
Shield active. Rockets.